Not respecting any longer a rule-based system. I think it is a system of power. And this is not our way to deal with trade and partnership. So this is a clear signal, I'm convinced. And it is also not a secret that the European Parliament put an emphasis on fair and sustainable trade practice. And therefore, of course, there are a lot of discussion about the reform of the labor code in Vietnam, to the commitment on the ratification of the outstanding 3 ILO conventions and the ability of implementation in the sense of the agreement. So this is, I think, for the Parliament also an important issue. By the way, we had this morning the discussion about Japan, and also we raised the point that Japan has not ratified 2 of the convention. So trade is not an issue, it's end. Trade is a value-based instrument to improve sustainable growth and should bring benefit to people, and therefore labor rights and environmental rights are closely linked to trade. So, as I mentioned, we are convinced that this agreement will create benefits, which is really going beyond the economic change to establish to have a really closer look. And I know that a lot of questions beside the outstanding ratification between ILO conventions are here. We have now the chance to discuss this in depth with the 2 chief negotiators, and that's really a privilege to have both of them here with us. It's the Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade from Vietnam, Mr. Tan. Welcome. And Ms. König, the new Director General of Trade, welcome here to us. So they will have the chance to give their opinion about the benefits and the values of the agreement. And then we have a broad round of experts in the second round, which will give their point of view on really a lot of crucial aspects of the agreement. I will welcome them later on. But let me make very clear that I'm happy that everybody is here and everybody has the opportunity to discuss this issue here in the Parliament of Peace in Brussels, and this is the necessary and important fact that everybody has a chance to be part of the discussion. So this were my opening remarks, and the hearing is officially open. And of course, first word is our standing rapporteur on Vietnam, Mr. Sarali, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome everyone. There has been a very good evidence today how important this committee is and how important Vietnam is for the European Union. When only a few hours before that hearing started, the EU Commissioner for Trade, Madame Malmström, announced that College of Commissioners will next week adopt the final version of the EU-Vietnam agreement to start the ratification process. Of course, this was a coincidence, a very happy coincidence. It gave us a momentum, and I believe that we will be able to catch this momentum and to build a successful ratification process on that, and therefore I was very happy as a starting rapporteur to hear that, and I hope that this hearing will also highlight the whole process. Let me just remind you that we started negotiations in June 2012. We reached an agreement in principle in August 2015, and now 3 years later, we are entering the final stage, which I hope will allow us to complete the ratification in the current parliamentary mandate. I believe it is possible, it is desirable, and it is necessary. Why? Because this free trade agreement is a model agreement for economic growth and development. It provides a new ambitious model for EU trade and development policy with emerging economies, a model where we negotiate as partners on equal footing, where we share common objectives and values to stimulate growth, employment, boost competitiveness, fight against poverty, and consolidate structural reforms. A model where we have achieved the most comprehensive trade deal with a middle-income country so far. And indeed, a strong political and economic partnership creates the best possible conditions for development and for mutual economic benefit. And this model also clearly demonstrates that open trade, combined with structural reforms, is an instrument for development and social progress. And Vietnam is a very clear example of this today, because it is a development success story. 30 years ago, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. Today, it's one of the most vibrant, dynamic, and connected and interconnected markets in the Southeast Asia region. Also, this treaty is a model for increasing our soft power and showing that EU can play a role of a pioneer in promoting free trade globally in times where protectionism is unfortunately on the rise elsewhere. And there are few areas actually of European policies that are fully Europeanized. Common commercial policy is one of them. It is Europeanized for 100%. So it is just an area where we could show, the European Union could show a leadership. With a robust trade and development chapter, the trade agreement is designed to be an instrument to improve the local business environment as well as social and environmental conditions. And with all the commitments made and concrete steps taken by the Vietnamese authorities, the trade agreement is already acting as a tool to raise labor and environmental standards at international and European levels. And we can see it in various areas, from the labor code to forced and child labor, or most recently in the field of cyber security. We have a roadmap, we have commitments, and we can even see some results already. Of course, more needs to be done. However, it is a process in which the trade deal is designed to help accelerate reforms rather than set out a list of conditions before we can deepen our trade and investment relations. So again, we are entering a crucial moment in the ratification process. As I said at the beginning, we are in a very good situation, and we have to catch the momentum and finish our work during this legislature. Thank you very much for beginning.
Thanks a lot. And now I will invite Mr. Tan, currently Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade, for 10 minutes maximum.
Mr. Bernard, Chairman of the Committee, ladies and gentlemen, it's the first time Mr. Bernard and the Committee on International Trade of the European Parliament for giving me the opportunity to share our perspectives on the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may be aware, Vietnam has been consistently integrating itself in the global economy, including adherence to rules of multilateral trading systems and active participation in multilateral, regional, and bilateral cooperation. In addition to being an active member of ASEAN, Vietnam has established FTA relationship with more than 10 trading partners around the world. And as a result, Vietnam is now the second most open economy in the region, with trade accounting for more than 200% of our GDP. In the context of rising protectionism in some parts of the world, Vietnam continues to be the supporter of an open and rule-based trading system. And as the host of APEC 2017, we facilitated a strong agenda in support of economic and trade cooperation. In March 2018, Vietnam and other 10 countries signed a comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which is of higher standards than any other FTA negotiated in the region. The CPTPP, which is expected to enter into force in the next few months, is another showcase of unwavering commitment to free trade in the Asia-Pacific region, in the face of economic headwinds that are getting stronger by the day. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all have known, the FTA between the EU and Vietnam was concluded back in December 2018. We have since then engaged with our counterparts in the Commission to split the investment protection part into a separate agreement, namely the IPA. That work was completed back in June this year, paving the way for us to look into the possibility of signing and ratification in accordance with both sides' domestic procedure. And I am so happy to hear the news that today Commissioner Marshall confirmed that next week she will confirm the conclusion of the translation and trying to send the agreement to the Council for the ratification process to begin. The FTA was negotiated in the context of a majoring and comprehensive relationship. EU has consistently ranked as one of Vietnam's top trading partners, with two-way trade reaching 47.6 billion overall last year. Vietnam is EU's second trading partner within ASEAN region. And we are this far because we have the trust and the will to build a forward-looking and long-term relationship. As some of you may recall, the first step of developing our trade relations was to integrate Vietnam into the world economy. And while committing to adopt the reforms based on the rules of the WTO, Vietnam was given a helping hand from the European Union in the name of bilateral trade preferences under the CSP program. The first step was successful in transforming Vietnam into a middle-income country and moved millions of people out of poverty. We are now ready to move beyond the relationship based on unilateral trade preferences to being a reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationship through a comprehensive and high-quality FTA. And let me highlight some features of this agreement. First, the FTA will eliminate almost all tariffs. Given the complementarity structure between Vietnam and the EU, trade is expected to increase significantly. Vietnam's relatively higher tariffs will be placed down for imports from the European Union, including machinery and equipment, pharmaceuticals, foods and beverages, car and agricultural products. Second, in terms of foreign direct investment, many sectors that are now closed for foreign investment, such as beer and beverages, will be open for EU businesses through the FTA. Third, our FTA has the potential to promote trading services further through very liberal commitments across services sectors, including financial, distribution, logistics, environmental, and professional services. Fourth, the government procurement chapter of the FTA, with a number of preferential treatment given only to the EU, would mean significant opportunities for European businesses in pharmaceutical, healthcare, infrastructure, public transport, and others. Thanks to the EVFTA, Vietnam's rules concerning intellectual property rights, sustainable enterprises, geographical indications, renewable energy, technical barriers, food safety, and others will be brought into conformity with international practices. As it will improve Vietnam's business environment, it will also enhance trade and investment between the two countries. Last but not least, the broad coverage of the FTA, including strong commitment in the area of sustainable development, will certainly provide a good basis for us to develop trade in tandem with our sustainable agenda. Beyond that, we strongly believe that the FTA will bring about benefits that can be shared by both European and Vietnamese people for many years to come. Looking at the broader picture, as one of the first high-quality FTAs that EU concluded with a developing country in the region, the EVFTA can serve as a model for economic partnership between EU and the Asia-Pacific region. Ladies and gentlemen, concluding the negotiation is important, but it is only the beginning. And my government has already started to prepare an implementation plan to be submitted to the National Assembly so that we can open up opportunities for the people as well as the business community of both parties. I sincerely hope that many years from now, our next generation can thank us all for the wisdom and vision in aligning our interests for a brighter future between us and in sending the strongest message that in the time of rising protectionism, we are ready to stand by each other to promote the free and open trade between nations. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Khan. Now, the counterpart on the European side, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Dr. Sadi, honorable members, Vietnamese friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here with Deputy Minister to present and to discuss the trade and investment agreements that we have jointly negotiated. And I'm particularly happy at this point in time to have this exchange with you, as was mentioned previously by our chair, because indeed the decision to present the agreements for Commission approval has been announced today. I think the title of the hearing is very, very suiting. Benefits and values. These agreements are about benefits and about values. And let me touch on both of it, and starting with the economic rationale of the agreement. The agreement are unquestionably opportunity for European investors and exporters. When we, in 1990, established diplomatic relations with Vietnam, the country was just emerging from a long period of poverty and isolation. And since then, we have seen an impressive, radical economic and social transformation of the country that has come, as the Vice Minister mentioned, hand in hand with its integration into the global economy. The Vietnam we have today is a vibrant country. It is by now more than 95 million inhabitants. It has the fastest growing middle class in ASEAN and a very young and dynamic workforce. The workforce which has high literacy rates and education levels. It's also a country where extreme poverty has been eliminated to a large extent, and inequality is low compared to countries at similar stages of development. With a central location within ASEAN, at the heart of the economic region, Vietnam has good connectivity with most of the larger Asian countries. And it is one of the fastest growing economies in ASEAN, with a rapid GDP growth around 6% in the last 2 decades. As mentioned earlier, the EU has been one of the closest partners to Vietnam in this part of socio-economic development. And we have together forged a modern, broad-based, and mutually beneficial partnership based on shared interests and principles. Proof of this is the partnership and the cooperation agreement that entered into force in October 2016. We also have the figures to confirm the strengthening of our partnership. As mentioned, Vietnam has become our second largest partner in ASEAN, after Singapore and ahead of Malaysia. And although EU investment stock in Vietnam is still modest, around 8.3 billion euros in 2016, it is growing quickly. The trade and investment agreement will help complement and deepen the partnership between Vietnam and the EU and serve as a platform to develop further the trade and development ties. Moving then to the strategic relevance of this agreement, because we have to see this the EU-Vietnam agreement in a wider context. The agreements with EU exporters and investors at least on par with those of 3 countries, from 4 countries that have already concluded agreements with Vietnam. It is the ASEAN countries within the ASEAN economic community, Australia, New Zealand, China, India, Japan, and Korea that already have bilateral with the ASEAN bloc, and that are currently negotiating the regional complementary partnership agreement. And as mentioned, the CPTPP or TPP-11 agreement, which is expected to be shortly. So the FTA and the IPA will allow EU operators to not only to catch up, but in many cases go beyond what our competitors in the region have opportunities with. The agreement will also strengthen EU presence in Asia following the new generation agreement which has been concluded with Korea and with Singapore. Particularly in the Southeast Asia region, following the Singapore agreement, the agreement with Vietnam will be a stepping stone for further engagement with the region, with the ultimate goal of having a regional engagement between ASEAN and the EU. And without any doubt, together with Singapore, the EU-Vietnam agreement with force of is a very good reference point for other agreements that are currently under negotiation with other big ASEAN countries like Malaysia, for example. as was mentioned also by other previous amendments. It's a broader dimension of the global rules-based trading system, which is currently under attack. Severe pressure, and indeed agreements like this will be accountable to what is unfortunately going to the substance, and Virginia has mentioned a lot of the issues and the achievements we have. It is the most ambitious and comprehensive here that we have to do. And as I mentioned earlier, it is very important the level of ambition we have with Singapore, which is a remarkable feature. But it's also a sign that the United States agreement as a transformative agreement following the development that the United themselves have put as an aim. It was mentioned that we will virtually eliminate all the tariffs within 7 years, and within 10 years. Large amounts of export duties will also be removed. Farmers and the small businesses will benefit from increased protection in GIs. It was already mentioned that the procurement rule will be of benefit not only for, as extension, farming and infrastructure, but also on green tech, which is an important area for you. And indeed something which would be of obvious benefit both for Vietnam. With FTA will also help trigger a new wave of what we hope to be high quality investments in both directions. And that will bring me now to the investment protection agreement that we will need together with the FTA. The FTA, the Investment Protection Agreement, incorporates the new approach to investment protection in full, similarly to the Singapore FTA that is with Singapore also. The agreement will ensure a high level of investment protection through a clear definition of protection standards, while safeguarding both the EU and Vietnam's right to regulate. The new EU approach to investment protection thus strikes an improved balance between boosting job-creating investments and protecting the right of government to make policy in the public. Similarly to earlier agreement with Canada and Singapore, the IPA will now set up a modern and reformed investment court system to resolve disputes. And it also has a detailed and binding code of conduct for members of the tribunal and the future tribunal, as well as a set of mediation rules, and sets in full detail the organization, composition, and functioning of the FTA tribunal. So let me then turn to the values part. It is inherent in EU policymaking that trade, investment, and ultimately economic growth cannot come at the expense of environmental and labor protection or the development. In this regard, both the two agreements have a clear focus on sustainable development and have at their core the upholding of high social and environmental standards. The agreements include commitments and obligations to respectful labor standards and fundamental conventions of the International Labour Organization and the multilateral environmental agencies agreements. It avoids a race to the bottom of the domestic labor and environmental laws, and it involves independent stakeholders in the implementation of the commitments. The EU has a clear commitment to making human rights improvements central to our engagement and dialogue with Vietnam. And it has been a guiding principle when we negotiated these agreements with Vietnam and the previous peace deals. The roundtable on human rights and sustainable development was held in May 2015, following which the Commission carried out a deep, dedicated analysis and highlighting ways on how to address possible impact EU agreements on human rights and sustainable development. In this regard, of course, monitoring of the implementation of the agreement will be of important. But I am confident that the FTA will bring about progress through the focus on labour conditions and the process towards implementation of ILO Convention. It will bring progress through more transparency and adherence of rule of law in our agreements, and via closer integration and engagement with civil society. And definitely, it will institutionalize and cement the process of engagement with the authorities, whether through the TCA, FTA, or the specialized committees that we decide. Which brings me to the short final point on the next steps. While the adoption process on the agreements moves ahead, preparations are, as was mentioned also by Deputy Minister ongoing for smooth and timely implementation of the agreements. We are currently translating the agreement in all official languages and Vietnamese. And of course, we heard earlier today that they will be delivered to Council and Parliament very soon. But at the same time, we're also looking at assessing what needs to be put in place for the implementation. And we're having an active that once the agreements are ratified, we will be very clear on the things that needs to have already.
Thank you. I will give now first the floor to the chairman of the subcommittee of human rights, Mr. Mansell, for 2 minutes, and then to the chair of the delegation of South Asia for 2 minutes, and then I open the floor to the colleagues. We have now 15 minutes for this question session. Mr. Mansell, please. Oh. Okay.
Okay, we work together and I present the message. So, the Vietnam current human rights record raises concerns and casts serious doubts about the country's stated commitment to respect human rights. Those provisions for national security have been widely used to suppress peaceful dissent and shield scores of human rights defenders. In April, a group of UN experts urged the government of Vietnam not to crack down on human rights defenders and civil society organizations. The experts expressed their concern on the treatment of peaceful campaigners, that they have been treated and highlighted the use of Article 79 of the 1999 Human Code of Vietnam to charge and convict dissenting voices. Many human rights defenders, especially as Article 79, carries the possibility of sentences for life in prison. So, Mr. Mansell, actually, and myself would like to express a deep concern over the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement in relation to respect for human rights. In Vietnam, working conditions in major export sectors such as the textile garment industry, are extremely poor. In addition, there are no independent trade unions and the right to strike is severely restricted, even prohibited in many sectors. It seems that the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement contains some weaknesses regarding labor rights compared to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, the draft trade agreement with a number of countries including Vietnam and US. We know that the TPP has died following the withdrawal of the US. However, in the TPP, Vietnam agreed to enact legal and institutional reforms regarding labor rights. The 3 ILO conventions, 87, 98 and 105, were agreed to be incorporated into Vietnam's domestic law before the entry into force of the agreement. These agreements are not foreseen in the EU-FTA agreement. And so the question, actually also Mr. Panseri to you, Mr. Deputy Minister, is do you think that the 3 ILO conventions would be translated into the national law before the European Parliament votes on the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement? And the question to Madame Klinik. Why have you not put respect for human rights, including the ILO Convention, as a precondition before concluding the free trade agreement.
Thanks a lot. Mr. Langen, Chair of the South Asia Delegation.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Möglichkeit, heute eine Stellungnahme abzugeben. Als Vorsitzender der ASEAN-Delegation bin ich persönlich, aber auch die Mitglieder der ASEAN-Delegation im Europäischen Parlament sehr interessiert, dass wir in der Frage der Freihandelsabkommen Fortschritte erzielen. Nach der jahrelangen Auseinandersetzung um das Freihandelsabkommen mit Singapur, nach dem Abschluss der Verhandlungen mit Vietnam, ist für uns wichtig, dass wir in Zeiten... Für uns ist wichtig, dass wir in Zeiten einer neuen weltweiten Handelspolitik unsere bilateralen Beziehungen zwischen der Europäischen Union und der ASEAN-Region wirksam stärken. Und da können die Freihandelsabkommen, die jetzt ausgehandelt sind, nicht nur ein Benchmark sein für die gesamte Region. Es laufen ja auch Verhandlungen in einem anderen Stadium mit den Philippinen, mit Indonesien, mit Malaysia und mit Thailand. Ich habe 3 Fragen. Die erste Frage ist die dynamische wirtschaftliche Entwicklung in Vietnam. Eine stabile und junge Bevölkerung, ein intelligentes und arbeitsames Volk ruft geradezu nach einer intensiveren Verbindung mit der Europäischen Union. Das ist richtig und gut und es steht uns auch nicht zu, als europäische Abgeordnete das grundsätzliche politische System zu kritisieren. Es ist nicht unsere Aufgabe, in internen Verfassungen der Partnerstaaten einzugreifen. Deshalb ist das Einparteiensystem nicht unser demokratisches Modell, aber wir haben das nicht zu beanstanden. Aber, und darauf hat Frau Lochbihler hingewiesen, das Europäische Parlament will dieses Freihandelsabkommen, wir wollen es unterstützen. Und wir wollen deshalb auch Vorbedingungen hinsichtlich der Menschenrechtslage, der Arbeitsbedingungen, der Sozialstandards gewährleistet haben. Und da möchte ich die Frage unterstreichen, wie sieht der Plan aus in Vietnam, bevor wir als Parlament das ratifizieren? Wie sieht der Plan aus, die Vorschläge dieses Freihandelsabkommens in die Gesetzgebung umzusetzen? Und insbesondere in der Frage des Menschenrechtsdialogs, auch auf der Ebene des Partnerschaftsabkommens, brauchbare Fortschritte zu erreichen im Hinblick auf Meinungsfreiheit, Pressefreiheit und individuelle Menschenrechte. Das halte ich bei aller Euphorie für dringend notwendig. Und zum Schluss eine Frage an Frau König. Wie weit sehen Sie die Chancen, auf der Grundlage der beiden ausgehandelten Abkommen in absehbarer Zeit ein Region-to-Region-Freihandelsabkommen zu verwirklichen?
Herzlichen Dank. Now I have 5 requests for the floor, 6, 7, and then it's concluded. So please stick to 1.5 minutes. And Maria Arena is the first.
Merci beaucoup. Je fais partie des 32 députés qui ont évoqué à la Commission européenne leurs principales préoccupations concernant l'accord Union européenne-Vietnam et qui reprend un certain nombre de préoccupations particulièrement liées à la question des droits de l'homme au Vietnam, des libertés d'expression, de la censure, de l'indépendance ou de la dépendance de la justice, de l'emprisonnement d'un certain nombre de syndicalistes aujourd'hui ou de défenseurs des droits de l'homme. Or, dois-je le rappeler, l'article 3 du traité de l'Union européenne nous impose de promouvoir les droits de l'homme dans toutes les politiques que nous menons. Et donc, je pose la question à la Commission, est-ce que vous pensez que l'accord de libre-échange actuellement négocié avec le Vietnam est en conformité avec l'article 3 du traité européen? Ma seconde question est toujours à la Commission européenne. Vous avez parlé du chapitre investissement, et dans le chapitre investissement, il y a effectivement un ICS. Ce qui veut dire que si un investisseur européen est aujourd'hui au Vietnam et qu'il n'est pas respecté dans ses droits, il peut faire recours à un tribunal privé, habillé autrement, mais en tout cas un ICS. Je vous pose la question, quid d'un syndicaliste emprisonné? Quelle est la possibilité pour ce syndicaliste d'avoir recours à des droits qui sont des droits tels que nous les défendons, que nous ne voulons pas imposer,
comme les droits des investisseurs. Effectivement, le Vietnam a sa possibilité de traiter les investisseurs, mais il y a une juridiction qui s'organise. J'aimerais qu'une juridiction de ce type s'organise également en ce qui concerne les droits de l'homme, et donc je pose la question à la Commission. Merci.
Merci. Jude Kirton-Darling, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to both negotiators. My question goes in a similar direction. I'm also one of the signatories of the letter, cross-party letter representing all political parties in this House. Before Vietnam joined the WTO, there were commitments which were undertaken in terms of human rights and sustainable development at that time, and yet what we're hearing on the ground from Vietnam, from human rights organisations and human rights defenders, is that in the last 2 years the situation and the space that they're given is getting more restrictive. Issues like the cybersecurity law, increased punitive actions against human rights defenders, longer sentences, and punitive actions like people being moved away to further regions from where their family are, making prison an even more harsh punishment when people are put in prison. So I would like to join those questions asking what the Commission is asking for before we get to a vote in the European Parliament in terms of human rights, and to the Vietnamese authorities what the Vietnamese are planning in terms of roadmap. Because I remind people that we are focused in the presentations. I heard a lot about the sustainable development chapter and about labour rights, but human rights are indivisible, and civil and political rights to me are as important as labour rights. You cannot have free trade unionism without the right to free expression. So those sets of rights cannot be split. And maybe one way of showing goodwill and commitment in the direction would be to take some actions immediately, including the freeing of political prisoners like Mother Mushroom, directly linked to online blogging actions, and others, to show that actually there is real concrete action behind the activities, because I don't think we want to have the situation that we had with accession to the WTO, where we saw lots of commitments on paper but very little action in reality.
Caroline Gonzalez.
Dankeschön. Ja, wir haben es heute schon ein paar Mal gehört, regelbasierter Handel ist wichtig und dazu stehen wir. Und dieses Vietnam-Abkommen soll auch ein neues Modell für die Handelspolitik sein. Nur sehe ich derzeit Überschriften, aber mir fehlen noch die Inhalte. Wir haben es jetzt schon von verschiedenen Seiten gehört, wenn es um Menschenrechte geht, wenn es aber auch um Arbeitnehmerinnen und Arbeitnehmerrechte geht, da sehe ich hier noch einen großen Nachholbedarf. Sie wissen, wie wichtig uns die Kernarbeitsnormen sind. Herr Lange hat es schon erwähnt, dass es bei Japan auch 2 fehlen, bei Vietnam sind es 3. Meine erste Frage, welchen Plan gibt es hier zur Ratifizierung, dass diese 3 Kernarbeitsnormen auch wirklich dann von Vietnam übernommen werden? Dann habe ich auch Bedenken, wenn man gegen Regeln verstößt, gibt es eigentlich keine Möglichkeit, dies einzufordern, also sprich das Abkommen irgendwie stillzulegen. Es gibt auch wieder in diesem Nachhaltigkeitskapitel keine Sanktionsmechanismen. Was passiert wirklich, wenn eben es zu einem Regelverstoß kommt, wie reagiert man da? Und generell möchte ich einfach fragen, wie es wirklich konkret sofort zur Verbesserung der Menschenrechte kommen kann. Was ist Vietnam bereit zu tun, dass wir ein Zeichen, ein Engagement seitens Vietnam sehen, dass es unsere Bedenken auch ernst nimmt? Danke.
Heidi Haudala.
Thank you very much. I would like to raise a very specific relationship between this free trade agreement and the so-called voluntary partnership agreement in Vietnam, which we are also dealing with in this committee, and I'm the rapporteur. I'm very fond of this instrument because it has proven to be one of the very best ways to encourage legal timber exports from countries. And at the end of the day, this is probably the way in which Vietnam can ensure that only legally harvested forest products will enter the European Union. But let's face it, we need to make sure that Vietnam puts in place all the necessary national legislative changes which are needed in order to cleanse the product chain of forest products. And I really encourage you to be very decisive and very quick on this, because otherwise we end up in a situation that we may have the free trade agreement enforced earlier, which actually is going to be a hindrance for our efforts on encouraging Vietnam to clean up your timber supply chain. So please, Minister, if you could explain how fast you are dealing with this. And may I ask the Commission here in this context? I'm sorry, but I do have an important question for the Commission. As the rapporteur of the voluntary partnership agreement, please. Is it true that the import duties on those forest products that are covered by the voluntary partnership agreement would be fully liberalized when the FTA enters into the force? And could it be possible that then... Is it possible that we lose the opportunity to deal with legally harvested timber? So what is the Commission's view on this?
Thanks a lot. So I will really stick with it for speaking time, because everybody has important questions, no doubt about it. But we have also some guests which have some really efforts to do to come here to this hearing, and I want to give them also the opportunity to give their views on the agreement. So 1.5 minutes was agreed. Please stick to this. Alessia Mosca.
Come è evidente dagli interventi che mi hanno preceduto, per questa aula assembleare la questione dei diritti umani è particolarmente pressante. Questo non vuole in alcun modo ridurre il riconoscimento del fatto che questo sia un accordo che ha un alto livello di ambizione, e riconosciamo anche l'importanza strategica e geopolitica di questo legame. Però riteniamo davvero che sia importante da parte del governo vietnamita far dare dei segnali che indichino una inversione di rotta. Quello che ci ha preoccupato particolarmente nell'ultimo periodo è il fatto che invece che essere fatti dei progressi in avanti rispetto ai diritti umani e ai diritti dei lavoratori e ai diritti, diciamo, nel concedere maggiori diritti politici, siano stati fatti dei passi indietro. Quindi la mia domanda è: come intendiate mostrare questa buona capacità e questa volontà di ingaggiarvi in modo più concreto su alcune azioni, alcune delle quali sono già state identificate e che non necessitano di un grande lavoro di modellamento della vostra legge interna, come per esempio il rilascio di prigionieri politici o la modifica della legge sulla cibersicurezza. Grazie.
Grazie, io sono avvantaggiata da alcuni interventi che mi hanno preceduta, in particolare dall'intervento dell'onorevole Arena e della collega Chiarandalli. Ringrazio moltissimo per questa possibilità di scambio di opinioni. Indubbiamente il Vietnam è uno dei paesi che ha conosciuto una delle crescite economiche più importanti negli ultimi decenni, una crescita che ha fatto uscire dalla povertà molte persone, ma che presenta ancora molti squilibri sia sul piano sociale che sul piano ambientale. Nello scorso giugno ci sono state in Vietnam manifestazioni della popolazione contrarie alla creazione delle nuove 3 zone economiche speciali. La preoccupazione è che in queste zone verranno attratti investimenti per standard sociali e ambientali più bassi e per produzioni di scarsa qualità. Esistendo in Vietnam già 18 zone economiche con condizioni favorevoli agli investimenti stranieri, che il paese già attrae in quantità significative, ci chiediamo qual è il senso di queste nuove zone, se verranno rispettati gli stessi diritti salariali, le stesse leggi sul lavoro e gli stessi standard ambientali. Come già è stato detto, sempre sulla questione dei diritti del lavoro, ci chiediamo se il Vietnam si impegna a ratificare le più rilevanti convenzioni dell'ILO, inclusa quella sulla libertà sindacale, e questo per noi è un punto molto significativo, ossia il rispetto dei diritti umani e dei diritti dei lavoratori. A questo proposito chiediamo a che punto è l'approvazione del nuovo codice del lavoro e se quali sono gli impegni del governo vietnamita per rispettare gli accordi di Parigi. Sul gas serra. L'ultima domanda invece è per la Commissione, cioè cosa avverrà se non vengono rispettati gli accordi del capitolo sullo sviluppo sostenibile.
Thank you very much. Following on some of my socialist colleagues' questions, there's been comparison to the CPTPP. I'd like to ask the Commission if the TSD chapter here, compared with the CPTPP, isn't wider in scope, especially when it comes to the question about the environment. The second question I have to the Commission is, we've been having questions about sanctions to TSD chapters. Can the Commission mention any trade agreement by any actor in the world where sanctions in TSD chapters have been called upon and upheld of the dispute settlement? And then I have two more questions myself. This is claimed to be better for free trade. I wonder, just when we come to rules of origin, how can we claim that when we are less generous, not at least in clothing and apparel, when we now have double transformation compared to what they had with GSP when they could source from other GSP countries? And how can we say that that's a step in the right direction to limit the possibility to source that important? Last question. I can say a lot of good things about Vietnam, but I can't say that it's a democracy respecting rule of law. I can't really say that. And considering that, the need for a BIT is of course crucial, but at the same time, is it really reasonable that an investor in a dispute will have to choose arbitrators from a list that Vietnam has decided upon, compared to the old ideas where they could choose freely what arbitrators they want? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I will give now back the floor to the chief negotiator, perhaps in the different order. Helena König will start. Please try to be short as possible.
Yes, I'll try to be short. Unfortunately, that would mean that Deputy Minister Khan will have a bit more on his plate. But either way, I think there was a lot of questions for Minister Khan. On the human rights, let me start with that. Of course, I think we all agree it is not a perfect situation. Very few partners we are, or actually even ourselves, are perfect when it comes to everything. We also have to take account from where you're coming from, and as we said, in many aspects, we're talking about trends and how can we reinforce positive trends, including on human rights, or more specifically as being done in the trade agreements where we cover environmental issues and labor rights to a big extent, but also other rights. We do use all of our instruments when we discuss human rights, so it's not an isolated thing. We try to reinforce what is already being negotiated more in detail on human rights in the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, which has been approved. We try to reinforce that with the areas that we cover under a trade agreement. We will continue and be in very close contact with our AS colleagues and of course with our delegation in Hanoi to make sure that whatever we are pushing it's actually an EU broad policy. And I think it's fair to say that when it comes to labor rights, the signals we have been receiving from Vietnam so far is indeed that there is an interest of already looking at these ratification of these conventions. I presume Deputy Minister will come back to that, and we are indeed following up on it to make sure that we can see sustained work towards those ratifications of the unratified convention. So with that, our overall objective is actually to have tangible results, obviously, but as I said, it's a movement. We're not going to be able
it's never possible to move overnight to one situation. And I think in this case, we hope to be able to see movement on the labor convention as soon as possible. On the TSD chapter, I think it is fair to say that our TSD chapter covers more than the CPTPP chapter does. I'm not going to go into the discussion about sanctions again, because I think we've had that discussion a number of times. And also you will have seen our 15-point action plan, which we actually already are putting into place by following up on the ratification of the ILO Convention, by putting in place programs to support civil society, by looking particularly close at the enforcement, which includes all aspects under the TSD chapter, and looking at climate issues also. And there I would say we're particularly pleased to see that we actually have a commitment to enforcing commitments under the Paris Agreement in this FTA also. On the forestry aspect, on the FLEGT aspect, it is true that the import duties will be liberalized at the end into force. On the FLEGT as such, Vietnam is firmly committed to implement the FLEGT commitments. We're still in discussions on possible signature on it. And I think actually, to be quite frank, we're not going to lose leverage just because we are liberalizing these tariff lines, because it's actually Vietnam themselves who have committed to and who has shown the interest to sign up to the FLEGT. So it's as much in Vietnam's interest as in ours to ensure that we have sustainable timber coming into Europe as soon as quick as possible. And I think the quicker we actually have the FLEGT, the quicker we will be able to monitor that also. I think on just finally on the question on whether we have any example of where sanctions has been used in the TSD chapter, we know that there has been challenges under other chapters. The issue with it is that it has so far no challenge has been able to demonstrate that there is the linkage between the the non-following up on issues in TSD chapters, that they have an effect on trade or investment, which means that the challenges and the sanctions that would have followed has not been successful. And I think that's one of the bases where the Commission firmly believes that the cooperative way and the way we are proposing and the system we are proposing in our chapters for enforcement is a better way to go, where we actually have discussions with government, we have involvement of civil society, we have independent experts, and we have publication of those results. I know there is not unison view of this, but this is the result we have come from our deliberations.
Thanks a lot. 15 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to appreciate all of the comments and questions raised about the EVFTA. I don't know whether I can be short because there are so many questions addressed to me, but I will try my best to explain everything. First of all, on labor. For Vietnam, the EVFTA was the first FTA that incorporates strong commitment to respect, promote, and effectively implement the fundamental right at work, as enshrined in the ILO Convention. And Vietnam and the EU further stated that each side, I quote, will make continued and sustained efforts towards ratifying, to the extent it has not yet done so, the fundamental ILO conventions. Since then, we also, like I said, signed the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement with similar commitments. And let me confirm that there is no provision in CPTPP requiring any legislative changes before the entry into force of the CPTPP agreement. Let me confirm that.
In our case, even though the EVFTA, the FTA between EU and Vietnam, has not been signed yet, but Vietnam has been very proactive in preparing for the implementation of the obligation that we took under the Sustainable Development Chapter of the EVFTA. I can mention that. First, following the conclusion of the EVFTA, the Prime Minister of Vietnam has promulgated a plan. It was promulgated in December 2015 to promote the ratification of all the 3 ILO conventions that have not been ratified by the National Assembly of Vietnam. I would like to note that out of 8 conventions of the ILO, Vietnam already ratified 5 of them. Now 3 remaining, we have the plan to promote the ratification. This plan contains very concrete efforts on the part of the government, including with respect to the dissemination of information and incorporation of international principles into Vietnam's law and practices and capacity building for government. And second, there is a proposal by the government to the National Assembly in Vietnam to comprehensively revise our labor code, and that will align Vietnam's laws and practices with the international standards, including those of the ILO. And such revised law is expected to be submitted to the National Assembly in May and enacted in November 2019. The government is now, with the assistance of the ILO and other donors, actively preparing in accordance with the legislative plan as decided by our National Assembly. So let me confirm that even though the EVFTA has not been signed yet, the steps are already taken in Vietnam in order to respect the commitments that we made in the Sustainable Development Chapter. And now about environment. That is the long story, but let me be very short. Vietnam is paying utmost attention on environment protection throughout our economic development. We passed the environmental law back in 1993, and in 2012, Prime Minister launched a national green growth strategy with a concrete green growth action plan. And then in 2016, I guess that you know that Vietnam joined other countries in adopting the Paris Agreement. EVFTA will help Vietnam to go further than that. Chapter 13 of EVFTA, which is the Sustainable Development Chapter, will ensure that trade will not come at the cost of environment protection. In this chapter, Vietnam commits to faithfully and effectively implement the multilateral environment agreements that we ratified, including those on climate change, which is the Paris Agreement, and those on endangered species and biodiversity. We also commit not to sacrifice environment standards for the sake to attract trade and investment. And the same commitments appear in CPTPP, though showing the great determination of my government to environment protection. And now on the illegal logging and the VPA, my government is also very determined in combating illegal logging. And that is why we are among the very few countries in the region who agreed to negotiate and sign a VPA pact with the European Union, which is the evidence showing that we are determined to say no to illegal timber. I very much hope that with the rising awareness of the business community in Vietnam and efforts of the government, including through the implementation of the VPA, which will be signed next week in Brussels, that would help to us to bring the encouraging outcome in the near future. And now on the last thing on human rights. You said many things about human rights. Let me confirm, Madam Curtin-Darling, that in the WTO accession process, we never made any, I don't remember making any commitment in terms of human rights, because WTO is not about human rights. So please correct me if I am wrong, but we didn't make any such commitment. On EVFTA, I think the EVFTA is part of a much broader framework of cooperation between Vietnam and the EU. It's part of a much broader framework. As such, we do expect that it will contribute to the strengthened relationship on all fronts. And the past experience in Vietnam has suggested that trade and investment has contributed a lot to the sustainable development objectives as well as the social advancement in Vietnam. That is also part of the strategic reason why our government adopted a strong international economic integration agenda. That includes rules on transparency, predictability, and strong engagement with the stakeholders. Unfortunately, I am only a humble trade negotiator, and as other trade negotiators around the world, human rights are outside of my expertise, beyond my expertise. However, I think that our other colleagues, both in Vietnam and EU, including our dear ambassador who is also present here today, will have excellent story to tell as a result of our cooperation through partnership and cooperation agreement and other forums. I very much hope that I answered the question. If I don't, then please forgive me.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Deputy Minister, for this reaction on the question of members. This concludes the first part of the hearing. In the second part, we have 5 experts on the FTA with Vietnam on totally different perspectives, and I'm really happy that all 5 of them are here in this forum of open discussion. Mr. Nicolas Audier, he is the co-chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, and I invite him for 6 minutes maximum to give us his view.
6 minutes, I thought I was able to have 10 minutes. Anyway. Bonjour Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le rapporteur général, Deputy Vice Minister Hein, Madame le colleague, and I'm very happy to be here today. It's a great honor. I represent the European 1,000 members, and 16 of our members are here today in Brussels to push to tackle the EVFTA. Just one thing on the ILO Convention, I'm practicing law in Vietnam for the last 30 years, and the good news that they will be ratified by between 2019 and 2020. So that will be the ILO Convention. So I've been practicing law in Vietnam for the last 30 years, and I'm the chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce, which includes 1,000 members. 2/3 of our members are SMEs. They were just in the other room that we went this morning because we attended the European Parliament. And all the SMEs, all our members are backing the EU FTA. It's important that I say who we are. The European, we are not financed by Brussels. We are not financed by the EU Commission. We are not financed by the EU delegation. We are not financed by the Vietnamese government, by Mr. Ministry of Trade. We are a fully independent organization. We are fully financially supported ourselves. So what we said is the statement of our 1,000 members. The goal of our institution is to promote Vietnam, to make Vietnam a very friendly business country, to promote trade and investment in Vietnam, and this is what we have done over the last 20 years, because we have been established 20 years ago. We are the voice of the 16 sector committee. So when Vice Minister Hein was working with the EU delegation and the EU Commission on the FTA, we were there with our 16 sector committee. So sorry, Mr. Hein, I know we have been asked, because we are the voice of our 1,000 members. Sometimes we have been asked in our discussion on one spirit automotive sector, but we are the voice of our 1,000 members. We have the best voice because actually we are based all around Vietnam. We are not only based in Hanoi, Vietnam, but we are on the countryside, because when we build factories, textile garment industry, sugar industry, they are not in Hanoi, not in the city, but they are on the countryside. And this is why we are an office in Haiphong. So people who know Vietnam, Haiphong is one of the second port in Vietnam. It's probably one of the top important industrial zone in Vietnam, and of course you have many workers, many companies in the Haiphong. And we have an office there. We have also an office in Da Nang being the center of Vietnam, and we are also very active. Another office we have, which is in Dinh Dong. Dinh Dong is the place where all the textile, garment, shoes are mainly produced in Vietnam, and we have an office there. And we are working with the People's Committee of Dinh Dong to ensure that EVFTA, all the principles of the rule that Yocham promotes in Vietnam are fully enforceable in Vietnam. We publish, I don't have a copy there, but once a year we publish what we call the White Book, and we have a regular dialogue with the Ministry of Trade. And thank you, Mr. Hein. We have regular dialogue with the Ministry of Land-Made Investment, with the MORISA, the Ministry of Trade, regular dialogue with the State Bank of Vietnam. Why? Because again, we are the voice of Vietnam and want to make sure that the principles that Yocham give in Vietnam, the European value, fair and open trade, are fully understood by the Vietnamese ministers and government in Vietnam. I've been in Vietnam for the last 30 years and had the chance to witness all the change in Vietnam. It's amazing how Vietnam was. I'm sure some of you have been in Vietnam in 1987, but in 1988, Vietnam decided to open what they call the Doi Moi policy, to open Vietnam to foreign Western company. When I came in 1992, I see all the change. It's amazing what has been achieved over the last 30 years. The average economic growth has become 6% per year since 2000, and we are going to reach 6% in 2018. When I came to Vietnam, 50% of the population was earning less than €2 per day or $2 per day. Now, the figures is not 50, but 3% of the population are at that level. When I came to Vietnam, 50% of half of the household housing in Vietnam didn't have access to electricity. Now, basically, everyone in Vietnam has access to electricity. When you go to any villages in the northern part of Vietnam, in the south part of Vietnam, you can see everywhere that you have electricity, the kids are going to school, you have access to the medical sectors. The kids sometimes go to college, sometimes go to work, to Ho Chi Minh City. So in 30 years, I see all of that in Vietnam. And the GDP of Vietnam increased by $400 in 1998 to $2,000 in 2018. So this is Vietnam of today. And last week we celebrated in Vietnam 30 years of foreign direct investment, and that was amazing what has been achieved. Vietnam, something that I'm sure you know, but Vietnam has signed 16 and be a multilateral free trade agreement with 56 economies worldwide. When I was invited last Friday to deliver a speech with the Prime Minister of Vietnam, we'll be in Brussels next week. Samsung, the foreign investment in Vietnam are enormous. Just to give you the size, Samsung has invested in Vietnam as much as all the EU invests in Vietnam since the Doi Moi policy. So that just gives you the size of the foreign investment. When I say Eurocham is a big chamber of commerce with 1,000 members, when I'm wrong. The Korean Chamber of Commerce, they have 10,000 members. 100,000 Koreans are living in Vietnam to push foreign investment in Vietnam. And the speech of the chairman of the Korean Association in Vietnam, I say to the Prime Minister of Vietnam, Mr. Prime Minister, foreign company can come. Please open the door, open everything. We are coming to invest in your country. So if Europe is not investing in Vietnam, well, it's bad news for us, but very good news for the Korean. And not to mention the Chinese investment. I'm sure you all heard about the one belt, one road policy. Well, we start in Vietnam. If you see the border between China and Vietnam is just, we have a common border with Vietnam, and the one belt, one road policy is coming, is in Vietnam. So we are very concerned from Europe to see that after 30 years of strong involvement of Europe, well, Korea is active, China is going to be active. The US are not so active because of this Trump policy, which is good news for us. So, well, a fantastic momentum in Vietnam. So this is why the Yocham is supporting the EVFTA. I haven't mentioned, but many things have changed in Vietnam. The SOE SOEs change. What I would like to say that we have been working with the Ministry of Trade since 2012 with the EVFTA. And the last thing I will say is that, like we were doing for the WTO, we are going to establish a dual charge commission to make the follow-up of the EVFTA, like we are doing what you call the gap analysis between the FTA and we have the EVFTA report, which highlights, and I give that to our friend who has a comment on the ILO convention.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think you will be elected here. Ms. Karen Curtis is coming from the International Labour Organization, and she will give us a view from this institution on the FTA.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ILO. Would like to thank you for having invited it to this kind of discussion. I'll just spend a few minutes to talk about how the ILO sees the values and values of the EVFTA from the ILO perspective, from the ILO decent work agenda perspective. I'm sure that you all know very well, and by your questions I can see that you all know very well the ILO and the ILO agenda, but you may not know as much about how the ILO has been working with Vietnam over the years. Vietnam rejoined the ILO in 1992, and ever since that time has progressively been ratifying and committing itself to a number of very important ILO conventions. The ILO opened a country office in 2003, and it, ever since that time, has been accompanying the government towards these ratifications and bringing law and practice into compliance with its voluntary undertaking commitments. It has already been mentioned that Vietnam has ratified 5 of the 8 core conventions of the ILO. This is about the average for the region. It's also ratified 3 out of the 4 governance conventions, and that's actually on the high side for the region. Recently, it's ratified a number of important occupational safety and health conventions, and of course also the Maritime Labor Convention. As mentioned by the Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade, the ILO has been supporting the government in its labor law reform process, aimed not only at a better implementation of ratified conventions, but also paving the way for ratification of other international labor standards, and with a particular focus on the fundamental conventions. The EVFTA provides a targeted opportunity for the ILO to work in a more intensive manner with the government towards this agenda. For the labor law reform process, the ILO has been accompanying the government over many years, supporting the review of the current labor code in light of international labor standards. It's been providing also awareness raising of the social partners on fundamental principles and rights at work, something that's critical to ensuring their buy-in and engagement to make these core labor standards actually come to fruition on the ground. It's been working with the government to develop a new industrial relations framework more aligned with international freedom of association and collective bargaining principles. And that means also capacity building for the development of institutions and their servicing that are in line with the modernized industrial relations framework. This means also promoting independent freely chosen representatives at enterprise level, creating the space for grassroots workers' organizations, and improving representative roles of trade unions and employers' organizations for stable and sustainable development. The ILO has assisted in an impact assessment of these changes and capacity building of the tripartite partners. We, of course, also have a better work program in Vietnam, which assists in the action at the enterprise level, as well as SCORE, which is in the wood processing sector. The ILO has basically globally 3 strategic areas of action in Vietnam to support Vietnam's global integration agenda, setting a normative foundation for inclusive and sustainable growth with social justice. Its 3 strategic areas of action include labor market governance, employment, and sustainable enterprise development, and social protection and social security. We additionally have an important project focusing on CSR, which of course is a very important element of the EVFTA, as this can assist in promoting the meaningful application of fundamental principles and rights at the grassroots level. This includes training on applying the principles of the M&E Declaration, which, by the way, recall that international labor standards are applicable throughout a country's territory and not an exception for CZs. It's also been working on evidence-based dialogue in wood and seafood processing sectors. As the Deputy Minister mentioned, and also the reforming, the government does have a roadmap setting out its commitment toward the objectives of the ILO 1998 Declaration, and which mirror those commitments in the Sustainable Development chapter. It includes a revised labor code necessary to create the groundwork for the adoption of and ratification of the remaining ILO conventions. And with the adoption of that code, as indicated by the Deputy Minister next year, to create the groundwork for the ratification of Convention 98 very rapidly. And for those of you that don't know, Convention 98 creates the framework that ensures the protection against anti-union discrimination and interference by the employer, and promoting meaningful collective bargaining at the enterprise level, a really stepping stone to ensuring full freedom of association. I believe that the other conventions also are being looked at in a progressive manner. The ILO is accompanying the government throughout this process in a new industrial relations paradigm and extending towards full freedom of association. We have several projects on the ground at the moment, including an EU-funded project promoting fundamental conventions and action to eliminate discrimination and forced labor. That's enabled us to have high-level meeting between the European Parliament and Vietnam social partners and supporting the preparation of files on these 4 labor standards. Finally, just in conclusion, I'd like to say that the Sustainable Development chapter of the EVFTA supports momentum for labor law reform and progress towards full implementation of 4 labor standards in line with the ILO Decent agenda. The commitment to continued and sustained efforts for ratification of remaining 4 labor standards recalls the universal commitment of all ILO member states, and it gives it greater impetus. The ILO welcomes the role it can play in supporting these objectives and the government of Vietnam's clear commitment that there can be no legitimate comparative advantage to be found in violation of fundamental principles and rights at work. Thank you very much.
And it's a specific pleasure for me to invite now Mr. Toàn, the human rights expert from Vietnam, to give his view to us.
Mr. Chairman, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to this hearing. Today I will limit myself only to human rights and democratization related to the EVFTA. First, I state 2 facts, and then I will make 5 remarks before making 3 recommendations. First, the fact. The text of FTA has been agreed upon by EU and Vietnam after long negotiations. The second, human rights situation in Vietnam is bad, and it has been worsening in the last few weeks. My remark. There is ample evidence that democracy improves human rights, and the following remark refer to some very well-known historical and empirical lesson of successful democratization worthy to consider. First, Modernization study can show clearly that the modernization process brings about structural conditions favorable for democratization and consolidation of new democracy. Second, successful democratization needs proper social movement, or in other words, a vibrant civil society. And a vibrant civil society promotes human rights development. So, the FTA as well as TPP and CPTPP require Vietnam to ratify core ILO Convention, the number 87, 98, 105, which all have impact on human rights regarding human rights development in Vietnam. EU member state would know better than any other regarding the impact of Helsinki Accord of 1975 on the development of civil society in the 70s and 80s in Eastern Europe, and we contribute significantly to improvement of human rights in Eastern Europe and promote democratization in 1989. Although not focused on human rights and democracy as EVFTA, as Helsinki, FTA will make a similar impact on human rights and democracy in Vietnam. Fourth, the FTA will make positive impact on economic rights of Vietnamese citizens, which will also consider as part of human rights. Fifth, it's generally accepted in the scholarship that integration into the world market will increase the influence of international pressure. If the FTA is ratified, EU will have more leverage to pressure Vietnam in the future negotiations. These observations also imply an important geo-economic and geopolitical issue that I did not mention, but I can add an additional remark. The FTA can help Vietnam dependency on big neighbor to reduce that dependency. I turn to my recommendation. All the 5 lessons mentioned about support the ratification of FTA. Therefore, my 3 recommendations are the following. EU should ensure Vietnam will sign and ratify the 3 core ILO conventions. And I am very glad to hear that Vietnam has such a plan. Taking into account that the TPP and the agreement between Vietnam and the US was much stronger than the ratification of core convention, ILO convention. And the official media report on 7th of October that the Prime Minister Vincent Phuc said that Vietnam is going to ratify the CPTPP in the next few weeks. And Vietnam and Japan have called the US to return to the TPP. This implies that the EU effort to help Vietnam to ratify is very, very high chance of success. We observe on August the 6th of this year, we call Vietnamese National Assembly to ratify as soon as possible and better in this October session. My second recommendation, Vietnam independent civil society organization to be included in the FTA monitoring mechanism, including the trade, sustainable development, and domestic advisory group. My third recommendation, the EU to include new mechanisms or improve the current mechanism under Article 17(2) of the FTA and Article 57 of the PCA to ensure that Vietnam failed to meet obligation under the PCA. The FTA will be suspended. It depends only on you. It's easy for you. One, these recommendations are met. Independent civil society in Vietnam will feel more confident in supporting the EVFTA. Last, I would like to take this opportunity to mention the case of political prisoners in Vietnam. It's a good case to release of them. Among them, I mentioned the case of Trần Huỳnh Di, one of our most prominent prisoners of conscience. He, in his recent letter from prison, Thuc, who was a successful businessman, has expressed his support for FTA as an opportunity to modernization of Vietnam and help Vietnam to reduce negative impact of the US and China trade war. He has been serving 9 years out of 16 years in prison, and there has never been a better time for Vietnamese government to release such a human rights and free trade advocate like Thuc. He is a great asset, and don't let that asset to be used not properly in the prison. It seems that there is a very small but uncertain interval difference between the authority and Mr. Thuc. The authority asked him to confess to be released.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to say that we have now to conclude. Even I know that you have some problems to come to here and we have a long journey, but I think the message is clear. You
from Moltke, the head of the Environment and Trade Hub Unit, the United Nations Environment Program. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation of UN Environment. We're really the agency that promotes the implementation of the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And I will very briefly talk about our work in the area of environment and trade, and then highlight the importance of environmental provisions in FTAs. Talk briefly about the specific environmental situation in Vietnam and the opportunities and the challenges that we see from our side as related to using the FTA and promoting a better environment. So the Environment and Trade Hub under UN Environment has as its task to improve the coherence between trade and environment policies and governance, and to use trade as a tool to achieve the SDGs and environmental sustainability. We are very much guided by the Sustainable Development Goals in all our four focus areas, including trade and environmental sound technologies and governance, in greening markets and value chains, and reducing the footprint of trade. The interlinkages between the environment and trade policies, including the FTAs. We've already heard that trade liberalization by its definition promotes economic growth and leads to different composition of economic activities, which can increase the pressure on the environment. So this FTA will have a very important role to ensure that pressure on the environment is minimized, but at the same time that the instrument is used as a positive environmental policy tool in terms of increasing environmental standards in both partner countries, and in terms of promoting global environmental policy objectives and offering capacity building and protecting the environment. At UN Environment, we have developed a sustainability toolkit for trade negotiators, which helps to improve the understanding of the environment and trade interlinkages and to support negotiations and implementation of FTAs and bring environment and trade communities together, and illustrates some different examples on how to use provisions within free trade agreements to promote environmental objectives. It goes through different ways of housing the environment within agreements. It goes through provisions, environment provisions themselves, but also related trade and investment provisions that will have a major impact on the environment. The point that I'd like to make is that the environment is an increasingly important item in FTAs in general. About 85% of all FTAs by now have environmental provisions. On average, in an FTA, we see about 60 different provisions, and within the Vietnam-EU one, we see 122. So in a way, it's a leading example. But it also bears its challenges. Now, in the specific context of this agreement, let me mention some of the challenges and opportunities that we see in Vietnam. So Vietnam is one of the world's most biologically diverse countries. It hosts about 10% of world species of flora and fauna, while it only covers 1% of the global Earth. It's particularly vulnerable to climate change, and particularly sea level rise, and has been hardly hit by natural disasters. And we have witnessed major pollution and waste, including hazardous waste issues, following rapid industrialization. However, we've also seen a lot of progress in terms of deploying renewable energy, phasing out CFCs, and strengthening chemicals and waste management. And it will be really important to see how the FTA can actually promote some of the positive trends while avoiding the negative ones. The Deputy Minister of Vietnam has already talked about the regulatory framework, but let me also emphasize that the Green Growth Strategy and the Green Growth Action Plan has been very ambitious and has a clear vision for 2050. And Vietnam has also been one of the first countries to introduce a national system for forest environmental services, and has been one of the first countries to put forward an action plan for implementation of the Paris Agreement. Vietnam has also ratified many of the environmental conventions, but it's important to emphasize here that implementation is a major challenge, particularly now that Vietnam is in its transition process from a low to middle income economy with much fewer financial resources available from ODA, and hence less financial capacity for implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So coming back to the interlinkages between trade policy and environmental objectives, specifically for Vietnam, a sustainability impact assessment has been conducted by the EU some years ago related to the ASEAN agreement, but many of the lessons are completely relevant to this one. And they include the challenges of trade agreements being a driver for increased economic activities, leading, for example, to overfishing, to pollution, air pollution and water pollution, leading to 80% of all illnesses in Vietnam from water pollution and illegal logging. And partnerships such as the FLAG partnership and other support mechanisms for Vietnam are really important to address these drivers. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to also see it as a positive environmental policy tools in terms of creating productive capacity in green goods, implementing the MEAs, and offering capacity building services. So I'm not going to run through the provisions itself in order to save time, but let me emphasize again that the FTA is an excellent opportunity for the EU to work closely with Vietnam to create new green trade and export opportunities, to create green growth and green jobs, to help address environmental issues and priorities and avoid negative impacts from increased economic activities, to support MEA implementation. That's very, very important. And to create a dialogue between all segments of society, including the environmental groups. Now, lastly, in terms of recommendations, the EC has an important role here to provide capacity building and technical assistance, and to encourage parties to also implement the aspirational targets, because a number of, particularly the Sustainable Development Chapter provisions are more aspirational than they are binding. And it will be important to put forward a dedicated budget for implementation, and finally to monitor the effectiveness of the sustainable development provisions and step up efforts if they are not considered sufficient. And finally, just to say from the UN Environment side, we are very happy to help with implementation wherever this is desired. Thank you.
The last one is Mr. Patella, the Senior Advisor from Business Europe. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the invitation today and for giving the opportunity to Business Europe to share its views on the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. Business Europe is an umbrella organization representing employers and businesses of all sizes in 34 countries, where we have 39 members. And we advocate for growth and competitiveness in Europe, and this is why we are supporters of free but also fair trade. And this is why we've been supporters of the ambitious trade agenda that the Commission has put forward in these years. And we hope that we'll be able to reap the benefits of the efforts made so far. European companies have three main reasons to support this agreement, and the two reasons have to do with the strategic and economic context, and the third reason has to do with the agreement itself. So, thinking of the first reason and to support the agreement, we very much think of the strategic dimension. In times when trade is being put in question and we have protectionist trends, it is very important that the European Union tries to strengthen as much as possible its ties with Southeast Asia, which is a very dynamic region, growing faster. And Vietnam itself is a very dynamic country, with almost 100 million inhabitants. It is growing steadily. It has been growing for the past 5-6 years at a very good rate, and the IMF has estimated the growth rate at 6.8%, which is a very impressive number for last year. It's the first agreement that we have with a developing country, and we hope it can serve as an example and also as a building block towards a region-to-region EU-ASEAN agreement. At Business Europe, we prefer the multilateral level than the regional level, and when these don't work, of course, bilaterals are an opportunity. A regional agreement would be the best in terms of opportunities for small companies that would have to navigate easier routes of origin, for example, so we very much think in this perspective. And also we think of competition, which is the second reason why we supported the agreement. Vietnam has decided to embrace trade agreements as a tool for growth. And this means that they have engaged in many agreements with many countries, and European companies will have to face competition